Cheap knives are great for self-defense. Hello everybody, Mannix here. I'm going to do a little discussion video, but first, as always, feel free to subscribe, hit the little bell notification if you do not want to miss weekly knife and gun videos. Now, the whole caveat to this video is when I say cheap knives are good for self-defense, I am not trying to say they are better for self-defense than more expensive knives or knives with better construction. What I'm saying is they generally will work good enough. Cheap knives can be fantastic for self-defense as well. Now, why is this? Well, first of all, just look at what a knife needs to be in order to qualify as a defensive knife or a tactical knife. We need a traction plan, I say anyway. I made a video on this in the past, but let me just reiterate here. Either some side traction, maybe some jimping somewhere to just help keep your hand locked into place. If your adrenaline's going, if you got some sweat in your palm, that's very, very understandable and very possible in a stressful situation like that when your life or someone else's life is on the line. We need to have a fast deployment. A one-hand friendly deployment is preferred. We have to have a strong locking mechanism, or at least just a locking mechanism that's strong enough for a self-defense situation. And I prefer having some reach. None of these knives are that long. This is the biggest one I got right here. It's an Efingro or Afingro, however the hell you say that. Not very long, but it's still a big, beefy old knife. This definitely will work for self-defense, absolutely. So we want reach, although most cheap knives don't have a whole lot of that. Okay, I'll give them that. But you have to have just a good enough locking mechanism, a traction plan of sorts, or at least a very ergonomic grip so it won't fly out of your hands, and it should be able to extract and deploy quickly. Knives that are cheap these days generally don't have any problems with those, except for, of course, reach, generally speaking. But do not laugh at a 3-inch blade. You can absolutely cause a lot of damage. You can kill people with 3-inch blades, as long as they're sharp enough. Big elephant in the room, a lot of people are going to think right off the bat, well, a cheap knife does not have a good enough blade steel. They'll laugh at a knife with a cheap blade steel, with a 3CR13 or the 440A or whatever is on these Ozark trails. A lot of people will scoff at those blade steels and say they are not good enough for self-defense. And I say, bullshit. As long as the blade is sharp enough in that moment, I think there's absolutely no issue whatsoever with a cheap blade steel, even a poorly heat-treated blade steel, even some piece of crap M-Tech from 15 years ago. As long as that edge is sharp, if you got it sharp and the knife locks up fine, there's no really obvious blade slop, it deploys fine, you can extract it out of your pocket, fine. Locks up fine, it's got a good enough grip, it's got enough reach to work with, even 3 inches. It can be good enough in a lot of self-defensive situations. Obviously, I prefer something longer, but if this is all you got, this certainly can work. Even the inch of blade right there, if you score across somebody's chest, yeah, that's going to cause a lot of damage. I would not want that to happen to me. As long as the blade is sharp enough in that moment, that's all you need. It's not going to go from razor edge, scalpel sharp to butter knife. You may just need one thrust, 1 or 2 slashes. I doubt any blade whatsoever, as long as it has some kind of heat treatment on its steel, is going to dull out on you and simply just stop being effective during that one defense situation you unfortunately find yourself in that day. This $5 Ozark trailer here, assisted as well. Look, it's got enough traction to work with, good enough ergonomics, 3-inch blade, drop point, tried and true design, absolutely adequate for self-defense, that style right there. Sharp. These blades come very, very sharp out of the package. Of course, you can further them yourself if you know even some very basic sharpening skills. Get that blade sharp and do not use it until that unfortunate situation came upon you. Now again, I'm not saying these are better than the more expensive knives. Obviously, I would pick a more expensive knife. I would never pick any of these knives in comparison to all of the other knives I have on hand if I were carrying it for defense. I have many, many, many other knives I would rather pick than any of these you see on the table right here. But if these are all you had, or you only had one of these, I don't see what the issue is. I honestly don't. Good texturing on this Ozark trail right here for sure. Long enough blade, again, get it sharp. It locks up fine. It's not a bank vault lockup. There's a little bit of slop in there, but it's good enough. I don't think it's going to disengage on you unless you smack this against a wall really, really hard. Nah, locking mechanism's good enough. Deploys nice and quick, even with just washers. Carries is fine. You can extract it out. Boop. Pop it open. I mean, you got to practice with these a little bit, but yeah, I absolutely would not want to be on the receiving end of this or any of these as long as they're sharp, which they are. Take these two knives, for example. On our left, we have the Spyderco Mannix FRCP, currently discontinued. CTS BD1 blade steel on this guy. Very lightweight cage ball bearing lock on there. And on our right, we have this nameless Ozark Trail. It was in the 3 for $15 pack Christmas season 2023. So you could argue this knife has a value of around $4 to $5 rather than the near $100 to $120 or so, whatever the equivalent of this would be today. We're virtually saving an $100 bill with this guy right here. Now, for defense, which one would I pick if I could just choose and money was not in the question at all? Yeah, the Mannix. Obviously, I'm going to pick this one. Funnily enough, though, the cutting edge is actually slightly longer on our Ozark Trail, but regardless, the overall length is longer on the Mannix. And I do like this blade shape a little more for defense because it's a little bit more acute. It's going to be a little bit more versatile, good for piercing. This guy is sheep's foot or santoku, whatever you want to call it. It can pierce, but the tip is a little bit more obtuse. Not going to be as good for piercing, but it's a stronger tip. Regardless, they both have decent side traction. The Mannix has more jimping all over the place. As you can see, Ozark Trail, it's got some side traction right here, but no jimping really anywhere. It's good enough. The handle is a little bit more hand-filling, although it is shorter. This still, I don't think is going to get knocked out of my hand too easily. Although the Mannix would be a little bit better. They both have a side actuating locking mechanism, cage ball bearing lock on the Mannix, shaft, axis, crossbar, Duralock, whatever you want to call this thing. Still works just fine. They're comparable, both tip up. People who don't really know anything about knife companies and knife values, they just know what a pocket knife is, and that's about where their knowledge ends. If you were to compare these two together, they probably wouldn't really know which one is quote-unquote better. They probably would have no idea. Unless you use these things a lot. You just cut and cut and cut and cut and cut materials all day long. Then yeah, eventually you're going to notice the Mannix is holding its edge better. But pretty much all of the other variables here, this Ozark Trail is really not that much worse than the Mannix. I mean, its fit and finish is not quite as good. Its construction is not quite as good. It has a really good lockup. In fact, the lockup's bank vault. It's as good, I would say. In fact, my Mannix is a little bit of side to side right now. Could just crank that out, but this carries fine. I mean, I like the wire clip a little bit more, but a lot of people don't like them because they're weak. This pocket clip works totally fine. This knife carries well. It's not swappable to the left side, unfortunately, but they both deploy quickly. They're both long enough. Both of these locking mechanisms work fine. Neither of these guys are on ball bearings. As long as the blade on this Ozark Trail is sharp, let's say you got it to a sharp point, you didn't cut anything that day, or even if you did make a couple of EDC tasks that day, you cut one or two things, opened a package, cut a zip tie or two, broke down a little bit of cardboard, cut open some plastic wrap, all the dinky, stupid things we do with our knives. This blade, I guarantee you, will still be sharp enough to work to defend your life. Again, if these were both free, of course, I'm going to pick the Mannix, but if money is involved and I'm kind of on a tight budget, you're going to save virtually $100 or so if you went with this one, and more or less it's probably going to work. If this knife would not work in a life-threatening situation against someone, I doubt the Mannix would work instead. Think about it, what would have to happen to get this knife to malfunction so badly to the point that it becomes inoperable for a situation like that? The locking mechanism failing and the blade closing on you? The blade snapping? I feel like a lot of those same circumstances would still apply to this Mannix right here. Mannix is going to be a lot better for utility. Overall, again, the construction and everything is better, and our blade steel is going to blow this one out of the water. It's going to last a lot longer. But I reiterate, I believe the longevity of the cutting edge is very, very redundant when it comes to defending your life against one or two people. When you're talking tactical use and you're out in the combat field for months on end, then yeah, you're going to want a cutting edge that's going to last a long time if you absolutely have no means of resharpening your cutting edge. But other than that situation, these cheapos, as long as they're sharp, they're going to work. So say what you will about the cheap knives, they certainly have their place, I believe. They absolutely can work for self-defense. Flesh is not all that difficult of a material to cut through. Clothes is not all that difficult of a material to cut through. With any blade steel, as long as it's sharp enough and it's heat-treated enough, the cost of the blade steel doesn't really mean anything in these specific scenarios. Says me. As long as you got speed, traction, a good enough lockup, and good enough reach, and that cutting edge is sharp enough, you'll be all set, my friend. That is my take on the cheap folders for self-defense. What are your thoughts on cheap folding knives for self-defense? Do you still think they're a joke? Do you still think they won't work whatsoever? Do you still think you need a more expensive blade steel, better heat treatment, or else they won't cut to the bad guy good enough? Do you carry any cheap knives for defense? Have you been in a defensive situation before with a cheap knife? Let us know in the comments down below. It's always interesting to hear what you guys have to say, and I always learn something from you. Thank you so much for watching. Mannix out.